Beyond the withdrawal of services by two scheduled carriers, the entire local aviation sector may be in for a shutdown of operations over a steady loss of fleet capacity that has made schedule reliability near impossible. Now, findings showed that the 8 active airlines are operating a cumulative 38.77% fleet capacity, with a total of 60 out of 98 listed airplanes grounded. Now, beyond this is the humongous price passengers are now faced with. Is the aviation sector collapsing? We have some who should know, who should actually know on the show this morning, and we would actually be having Captain. We'd actually be having Captain Alex Nguba, who is the National President, Aircraft Owners and Pilot Association. Many thanks for your time this morning, Mr. Alex. And but before we go to him, let's get some background information from our Daily Trust aviation correspondent, Abdulateef Aliyu. Thank you for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Good morning.
All right, so can you give us a background and also an update of what is happening in the aviation sector?
Yes, thank you very much. Basically, to use the word of the International Air Transport Association, aviation is a business of freedom, as IATA would say, and freedom in terms of facilitating businesses, facilitating tourism, a lot of things. A lot of people have this notion that aviation is elitist. That it's only the high and the mighty that use bird flight and so on. But that's not the case, because aviation is not just for the elite, it's for even the small business owners and so on. And if you are a businessman or woman and you have to spend over 200,000 naira return trip from Lagos to Abuja on alone, you know that definitely your business is will definitely suffer. And exactly that is what we are experiencing in the industry at the moment, where the cost of flight has really gone up, and it's almost not something even the ordinary Nigerian can afford at the moment. And this, as airlines have also said, was caused by the skyrocketing price of Jet A1. For most of the airlines, the industry generally is dollar denominated. Most of the things that the airlines do, talking about paying for aircraft leases, maintaining their aircraft, and then buying spare parts, and all that things are actually done in dollar. But with the situation in exchange, then you see that the airlines are unable to actually have access to this dollar, which is really, really affecting their businesses. And yes, the issue of Jet A1 has always been there. When you recall that last year, the Jet A1 is just 200 naira, was 200 naira per liter, but it is now almost over 800 naira, and it's not even available, which is really affecting the schedule of some of these airlines. And so, and like some analysts have said, that the airline should try as much as possible to sell their ticket based on the cost of Jet A1. And that is what some of them are doing now. From the analysis we did yesterday, the cheapest economic fare on most of the airlines are now over 80,000 naira. Before it used to be 50,000 naira, which a lot of Nigerians are complaining about, but it's now over 80,000 naira. And when you look at some of the northern routes, like yesterday, we are finding about Kano to Abuja alone, we're seeing over 120,000 naira and so on. That is exactly the situation we are facing at the moment.
All right, Abdul, apart from the fact that passengers are made to pay more, we also hear that some airlines are not deploying as many aircraft as possible. So walk us through the situation at the airport in Lagos, for instance, because we have seen pictures of people coming to the airport and there's no aircraft to fly them to where they want to go, despite the hike in price.
Absolutely. When you look at the fact that at least two of the major airlines are currently on temporary suspension. First, it started with Aero Contractors. You know, Aero Contractors is the oldest airline in Nigeria, which announced that it was suspending its scheduled operation temporarily. And due to some of the issues I've actually explained earlier, the airline talked about forex, that some of their aircraft have gone on maintenance, and they are trying to source forex to bring back some of those aircraft. And they also talk about the issue of the skyrocketing Jet A1. And the truth of the matter now is that if in the past, if airlines were probably, if the cost of fuel is maybe like 40% of the operating cost before, it's now almost 50%. So you find it difficult. Some of these airlines, they find it difficult to actually break even. And that is basically the issues. The aero contractor is not there at the moment. Dana Air, which is also a major domestic airline, is also on undergoing audit by the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority. These two airlines that are currently out of it alone have also contributed to the decline in capacity of the domestic carriers. When we now talk of other domestic airlines, we have other maybe 6 or 7 domestic airlines now. Most of them, they also have their aircraft on ground. When you have a situation of aircraft on ground, which we call AOG in aviation, definitely it will affect your capacity. Most of these airlines have their aircraft on ground, and they are trying to probably get some parts from the suppliers, maybe from Boeing or Airbus, but Boeing basically, because most of the airlines use Boeing aircraft and so on. If they are unable to source funds to bring back, to get some of this spare, or even bring back some of the aircraft that have gone on maintenance abroad and so on, definitely it will affect their capacity. And we can say at the moment that most of the airlines have issues of capacity. Those who even have the highest number of the aircraft among them, about 50 or even less than 50% of their fleet are currently active, which is why we are having this issue. At the moment, there is a serious issue of decline in capacity by some of these airlines, and that is why we are experiencing what we're experiencing at the moment.
Thank you so much, Abdulateef Aliyu, for taking time out to share all this with us. We really appreciate your time.
All right, thank you, sir.
Right, so with this, we'll actually move on to our other guest, who is the President, Aircraft Owners and Pilot Association, talking about Captain Alex Nwuba. Good morning, Captain, and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, and thank you for having me this morning.
Right, so can you take us through what the factors responsible for the crisis, in the aviation sector is, and do you think that the industry is on the brink of collapse?
Thank you. Well, the factors, what we are facing today, economic. It's not an airline crisis on its own. The airlines have been operating for decades in Nigeria. The industry has been growing. It's had some periods of challenge. But recently, their cost completely went out of control. They spiraled essentially out of control. You have a situation where an airline's operating cost was made up of many factors: fuel, engineering, staff costs, etc. And fuel being one of the major components, which was representing about 40% of the cost. From price, it went from 200 to 300 to 400 and 700. Almost in a very span of time. And the airlines have to go meet these costs essentially in order to keep operating. Cost went from to 90% without the rest of the other cost factors changing. So at the same time, they have to pay for many of their services that earns money in Naira and pays for their services in dollars. And so they ended up in a situation. And if we say 50%, it means essentially 100%, from about 400 Naira to 710 Naira. And so the combination of these factors has resulted in costs that have gone completely out of control. And the airlines are trying to ensure that they don't lose their customers by increasing the cost, increasing their fares to cover these costs. As we know, there's price elasticity. And so when services drops, they their income goes down, able to sustain the operation. So we've had this challenge in this economy. So it's really economic, not airline saving. Save almost on the way. Two airlines have gone out of this picture. Air went out on its own condition. Expenses it couldn't meet, so the Civil Aviation Regulatory Authority decided that they will stop them from flying at this point until while they audited them to make a decision to keep operating safely or not. So we're at crisis, what we call at the tipping point.
Captain Wuba, you have talked about some of the problems facing the sector, and Abdul Latif Ali also gave us a background to all the problems. What can be done immediately to arrest this situation, not necessarily in the long term, but walk us through what can be done in the short term before the long term?
Okay. As a first step, we have the situation where we say we have to cover some of these costs. 400 significant portion of the cost, the airlines remain viable, the rest of the problems. That's one. The other one is that the fuel is a product. Currently, the cost of importing is significant increase in the price, as well as the unavailability of dollars. So we have to address this. Can the central bank do something about the exchange rate? It's not, the exchange rate is not solely determined by the central bank, but they can take steps to arrest the trading Naira in conventional. It seems like we've agreed that Naira is traded on the black market freely, and even the regulatory authority now or access in the black market. If you clamp down on the black market, you should be able to clamp down on the uncontrolled increase in the fares. The other thing is that we have a significant of the product, there are opportunities locally. For years now, we've had refineries in the country that are not able to convert into, but if they're not able to convert fuel directly, they can create PMS, which is petrol for your car. They can produce diesel. This is the demand for importation of PMS and diesel, and makes more resources available for jet fuel. So there are some short-term measures to use the situation, not essential at this time.
Captain, now, according to reports, Nigeria is indebted to foreign airlines to the tune of $450 million. For example, Emirates have actually slashed their flights to Nigeria over withheld $85 million alone. With this development, how are these foreign airlines expected to meet operational costs and maintain commercial viability of its services to Nigeria?
The presentation was done by the COO of Igbo presentation to show the impact of Sunset Airport, which is the impact of not having airports opened for more hours in the day. We talk about 24 hours, but the reality is, given the existing security situation, if you open the airports for 24 hours, many people will not fly into those airports. You'll be willing to arrive on a flight that arrives after 11 p.m. So it's not so 24 hours, but expand of hours of the operation down when the sun starts to set, which is what set there. But in that presentation, and unfortunately the numbers have been wrong for that was about a week ago, and we bandied around numbers. Lines were losing money, but what he also said was that when you compute the annual loss per an airline's fleet, you have a number of 4.3 billion naira. So if you extrapolate that across the over 30 plus aircrafts that exist in this market, the number is not 4.3 billion naira annual loss, but actually 4.3 billion naira times 34, 35, 36. We're talking about an annual loss to the industry of $183 billion. Kind of money, none of your costs disappear. You still carry your overhead, you carry your staff costs, airport. Because once you get those airplanes, the payments keep running. So to generate as much money as they can to meet all of the operating costs. So when you're unable to do that because of restrictions current availability of airports. And then you have the combination of high fuel prices and the problem of foreign exchange. It continues to clobber the industry. With regards to the foreign carriers, like you gave the example of Emirates, it's a completely different situation, even though it's related. The international airlines operating into Nigeria have been selling tickets for a considerable amount of time. These sales were generated in Naira, and the monies have to be remitted back to the home countries of these airlines, totaling over $400 million. The central bank, they are not able to receive these funds. And so they're selling tickets, they're flying, they're not receiving the money for the sales that they've made. And this is challenging for them. And that is why in the case they talk about $85 million outstanding, and they say it's affecting their operations. And for that reason, they'd have to suspend and reduce the operations in order to reduce the damage inflicted to them by this challenge of the central bank to remit dollars to them.
All right, Captain. Last week, the Minister of Aviation met with some airline operators and all of that. And at that meeting, he made it clear that the problem wasn't going to go away anytime soon. He said that there because, I mean, some of the solutions he mentioned were actually long-term. Where are we on talks or meetings? Because after that meeting, we haven't heard of another meeting. What's the way forward? Are the aviation owners, workers meeting? Is there any other scheduled meeting to find a way out of this?
Well, there are engagements happening behind the scene. It's not everything that is going on in an industry. Going on behind the scene. When the minister says we can't solve the problems overnight, he's actually saying that the problems did not result overnight. Have been lingering for some considerable amount of time. Even the issue of remittance is not a one situation. It's happened actually it happened time. The fuel crisis and prices did not increase over some time. The challenges with fraud, obviously. So these problems have all been accumulating. We have no instant magic, or we have no magic wand we can wave and solve all of the problems. But engagement is going on behind the scenes, and we've got to basically solve these problems. But I should correct for the benefit of the audience, I'm not a captain. I'm a doctor. But for that sake, but I've been in this industry quite a bit of time, which is why you appellation.
All right, but in your view, do you see a solution anytime soon?
Like I said, the short-term solution, which is painful, is to increase fares so that these companies don't go out of business while we try to resolve the problems. Also, in Russia ends overnight, then obviously it would affect many things. It would affect food prices, it would affect fuel prices, because Russia and Ukraine are major producers of jet fuel. And so that the supply is a problem that has caused the prices to increase. The government is looking at exchange issues and the process. The central bank says it is the responsibility. The problem has been caused by the NMPC, which has not been making any remittances to the Federation, given the fact, and that's valid in the case that they say that we're exporting a product for 10 kobo, and we are importing it for 100 naira, and then we have to sell it for 5 naira. Well, that's what's happening at the NMPC. So obviously, there's no surplus to remit to the central bank in that view. So the short-term and immediate solution that has been offered by the industry is to increase fares, which is painful for consumers because these fares must be passed on to their business, their families, their challenges, and that reduces the total consumption of the product. So the short-term solution is fares.
Dr. Muba, Dr. Muba.
Yes.
People are already groaning under the current hike in the flight rate. And you say the way to go is to increase. Is that sustainable? How many Nigerians will be able to fly? Is that the only way out?
The problem with aviation is that we've begun to consider it a right. I have the fly by. I have a right to travel. Airlines want you to travel. They want to make available at an affordable cost. But when it is no longer affordable to, and the government dies it. So, for example, we want cheap petrol in our cars, but we know that the price is not not paying the price for the product. So we choose that the government should intervene at a cost to the economy in many sectors, whether it is medical sector, education, or power, or roads, or utility. So if as consumers we want to, then maybe the only option available to us immediately is for the government to pay for 70% of the price of your ticket so that it makes it affordable. But the reality is that the government has many priorities and it has many challenges. And they think that of course, there are some taxes that they can be reused both on fuel and passenger service charge, on airport charges. Some things can be done, but the reality is that when costs reach a certain point, the producer of the service has to increase his price to cover those costs or simply go out of business. So while we may be wanting cheap fares, it may come at the cost of not even having any planes operating.
Captain, now the FEC, just okayed Nigeria's air lease of aircraft to commence operations. And, one question a lot of people are asking is, after all these years, will this project see the light of day? And also, if it will, a lot of people are actually, concerned about the timing, especially considering, what is going on in the aviation industry today. Some see it as unnecessary. What's your take on this?
Well, the national carrier project seems laudable. The objective, an airline that Nigeria proud of, is available to them. And when they travel across the world, when you come out and you look windows at the airport, you see the Nigerian flag. This is very nice and makes Nigerians proud. But the reality of it is that this national carrier will not operate any differently from any of the private airlines in the country. They still have to fuel at the cost of fuel is being sold, unless the government chooses to subsidize it. They still have to pay maintenance costs, airport services. They have to buy foreign exchange for the lease of the aircraft and so on, which is not available. No magic to it. Of the short-term approach is to say, let's wet lease so we can start very quickly so Nigerians can have a carrier. That's another foreign exchange demand. It doesn't solve any real problems because at the same time, you take an airplane from a carrier that you have to pay in dollars, and then you also bring on board their staff from that foreign economy. So that's not job creation within the Nigerian economic space. The idea of the national carrier, or what would make us proud, is a Nigerian-owned carrier that employs Nigerians, gives opportunities to Nigerians to the industry for Nigeria, to carry people from A to B. That's already been done by the private sector. It subtracts value. So that should not be our highest priority at this very moment.
So you're saying that the Air Nigeria will not in any way help the current situation. That's what you're saying, Doctor?
Again, it will if the government says we are going to float an Air Nigeria, which belongs to all of us, but we know fares will be very expensive, so the government pay for your ticket. On a Lagos-Abuja flight of 150,000, when you buy that ticket, the government will pay 100,000 and you will pay 50,000. The question is why they do that for the existing private airlines to solve that immediate problem for Nigerians without throwing more money at projects. And that's really the question. There's no solution, no magic a national carrier will provide, given the basic problems in the industry.
Now, according to the latest data released by CH Aviation, which is a website invested in the database of airlines in the world for June 2020, Nigeria has attained a first position in the top 10 countries list with the highest percentage of grounded fleets. Now, they actually say Nigeria has 79 of 123 aircrafts grounded, calling Nigeria the junkyard of obsolete aircraft. Now, what difference would it have made if all these grounded, fleets were in operation right now?
Well, let's start with our industry evolves. Over time, we bought old planes which we retired, and we don't convert them to scrap. We just essentially leave them in the field. So if you aggregate those numbers and say that's the total number of airplanes in Nigeria, but we've removed some of them from the fleet, the numbers appear high. The fact remains that Nigeria, of 200 million people, only has 100 aircraft. It means that we haven't provided the fleet required to operate within the market. Some have been taken out of service and they have not been destroyed. And so that gets counted against us. There's the opportunity to expand this market, but it must be driven from a vision. And that was spoken about recently at the League of Aviation Correspondents Conference. How do we bring capital? One proposal was to create an aviation bank in order to provide capital to the industry to support and grow it. That is one proposal. The government has spoken of a national leasing company. For me, a brilliant idea, because what that does is airlines go out today on their own and acquire aircraft overseas. We don't manufacture any aircraft in Nigeria. The aircraft we acquire, less credit rating and some of the issues claimed by both insurers and financiers that they've had challenges with Nigeria, adds huge premiums to the rate, interest rate that airlines have to pay, which increases their cost. If we are either a bank of aviation or a national leasing company, we can leverage in a much more productive manner the sovereign credibility of the Nigerian government to get a low rate of interest, which can then be used to support the airline industry. Challenge with aviation is Nigeria that it is. We have no way. We have documents. We produce every administration a set of documents that guide the way move. But apparently, no movement. I mean, just yesterday or a day before yesterday, the government released a request for proposals for cargo airports. But meanwhile, if you look around the country, there are tons of there's no built-in cargo business because the fundamentals, even for the cargo business, is not existing. Nigerian products are going to other countries and branded as the product of those exported through those markets because of the challenges put in place, whether they're custom constraints or handling constraints or other logistical constraints that exist in Nigeria. So these goods end up in other countries as countries of those products that are originating from Nigeria. So we have to get our priorities right. And in getting our priorities right, we need to have proper visioned leadership that can say, we want to go as a country. Plus also, we not running away from the reality, staring us in the face that we have what is to be the African continental area, which covers the entire African region. We have open arrangement on the continent. And so that's going to exist. The question for us as a country is, what role will we play? How will we participate in the evolving Africa that is coming and emerging right before us? The date is not far. We always approach problems like at the very last minute, but we have vision leadership to say, this is how we want to position the industry. This is where we want to go. It's not a competition between the private airlines and government airlines. That should not take as a function. It is supposed to the economic activity of the private sector. That's what government is there to do, to expand the economy across the world. So we need to actually create the industry that we're proud of, move this industry forward.
All right, Doctor. An expert said that one of the ways, a short-term way to tackle the situation is by looking inward, and that is for the NCAA to review the 5% ticket charge. Do you think that will help?
I hate to contradict a fellow expert, but let's look at the numbers. Cost increased across the board 200%. So if we do math and we say, okay, let's take 5% out of the mix, what's the real impact? So yes, it helps. Everything helps. Everything we take out helps. If the government reduces, eliminates overflight charges temporarily, reduces the airport passenger service charges temporarily, reduces the tax on aviation fuel, uses many of these things to minimize the impact of taxation, dead person or dead business. So if we take the short-term step of reducing some of these taxes, we help the situation, but we do not eliminate it because the problems are much more fundamental and need to be addressed much more fundamentally.
It's obvious that, and from everything, well, Doctor, from everything experts have said, it's obvious that to eliminate the problem, we need long-term measures. So for the short term, yes, you may say that the 5% charge is not a lot, but isn't it time everything is on the table, so that, I mean, the goal is to tackle the problem, right? So if a little of this and a little of that, if we bring all of that together, don't you think it will help? Everything on the table.
And that was my point. Everything helps. The 5% helps, PSC reduction helps, removal of overflight charges helps, reduction of taxes on aviation fuel helps, government intervention in some matter, availability of foreign exchange in the industry helps. So when we put the bit together, they eat away at the problem, and ultimately things become a lot easier.
So that the only solution doesn't appear to be another hike. That was the reason I asked, so that every other option is explored before the hike, because the hike right now, taking into consideration the general economy of the country, may be a bit too much, don't you think?
Well, I think that one of the other problems we face as an economy and as an industry, because I represent the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, which is the largest private aircraft ownership group in the world, is that we actually explored all the available options in terms of air transport. We look at airliners being the only or primary mode of transportation. They are cost means of traveling. They are much smaller aircraft with lower operating costs that can be used to go into, look, over 22 or 24 or 27, the numbers keep varying because airports are popping up left, right, and center. Of our airports, only see primary use. That is only what? 25% of the airports see primary use. The rest are airports in which once a week, 2 times a week, etc. If we expand, and so doesn't mean that people don't live in those areas. People in those areas move to the airports that have service to move to other areas. Does that really address the security challenges of transportation on the road or by rail? So look to the industry, 6-seater airplanes, 19-seater airplanes, 10-seater airplanes, serving these smaller airports. These are opportunities. The operating not 4.3 million per flight, but maybe 100,000 naira per flight, carrying a smaller number of people at much lower cost. So one of the problems it faces is adopted, where I go back to a vision that looks at all of the industry as one and peels off and is the best sectorial allocation for this particular operation. So we maximize the use of our airports. By maximizing the use of our airports, access to the industry. As also, when we talk about maximizing our airports, we're not just saying many of these airports that don't see service and functional. So these airports and service providers depend getting their revenue from airliners, like I spoke about, who already have huge costs. If we expanded the offering in those markets to smaller airliners, we expanded additional services at the airport, like shopping malls and supermarket theaters themselves can leverage their cost of number, which reduces their cost, so they don't have to pass such impactful cost to the airline industry and airliners.
Okay, now my colleague has actually been, talking about, solutions in the short term. Now, if nothing happens in that short term, do we see more local flights, shutting down operations? Do we see more international flights slashing or even going as far as shutting down their own operations? And what does that mean, what happens to the business relationship, that the country has with, these particular foreign, airlines? What happens to the business relationship, considering that, where Nigeria is now, we're actually in need of more investors than, any other country?
Well, you asked a tough question, but the fact remains that we have to address these challenges. Foreign carriers will cut their operations to address the challenges they have with their income. This industry faces a serious problem. And that serious problem is that a few more airlines are likely to go under if nothing is done, because you can't continue to spend money. Environment also is very challenging. Most of the airlines depend on their money from ticket sales and bank borrowings. The capital markets are not as operative, or the airlines themselves are not going to the capital markets to look for equity investment. They attract funds into the company that doesn't come with an interest rate, but comes with rewards to the investors through dividends. So we also have to look at the model of the industry. Is at full digit. If locally or foreign exchange is at 4 times the international rate. So all of these things combined do not going forward. So in the short term, if nothing is done, we face the possibility on the end of this year, we would lose 3 more airlines, others will continue to remain and challenge. And I've said many solutions available.
Okay, well, we seem to have lost communication with Doctor, but I actually think he has said it all. Thank you so much for your insight on this particular, topic of discussion.